Thanks. Hi, guys.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
All right. It's a bit bright. Okay. Tonight, what I'm going to try and present to you is something from a more of a teaching perspective. I think one of the things that when you're presenting information like I would like to present tonight, you need to hang it on something. And I'm going to put it onto a story that I'm going to tell you about. It's about somebody's life. It's a true story. The person's not in the country any longer. It's not you. Okay. And it probably was one of the most complicated cases I've ever actually dealt with. And why am I telling you that? One, to hang the information on. Two, because I think it makes you aware of how to actually deal with people in your community. And if you're that person in this community that needs to be assisted, you kind of like have a benchmark of what's actually needed. Okay. And the truth is, sometimes the community doesn't help you. Okay. And but that doesn't mean to say that you mustn't continue to look for help and you mustn't actually pursue an outcome for yourself. One of the things I've realized is, and as I'm talking, you'll see that God puts a mandate on us, okay, to be whole. Yeah. Okay. And that mandate is your mandate to be whole. You've got to pick that mantle up and you've got to pick that baton up. And you've actually got to proceed with that. And sometimes we presented with some really difficult challenges. He's not, and I already say this from a personal perspective, having gone through my own journey, that, I've never been condemned by him. People do that, but God doesn't. All right, so we're managing depression and anxiety tonight. I'm going to try to speak to both aspects along the way. And engage you in this story, and then maybe just give you some myth busters along the way, and actually just take maybe a different track to the one that's actually been sold out there, and you'll be completely confused by the time I'm finished. So that's also okay. At least you're thinking. All right. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see it says lost connections, lost meaning, integration. And if you don't forget, you don't remember a single thing I say, remember the story and remember those three words. Those three words embody, as it were, everything that I'm actually trying to say to you tonight. And it's lost connections with ourselves, lost connections with others, losing the meaning of why I'm here, what I'm doing here, and then integration, becoming whole. The word integer comes from the word one or one unit. So to integrate is to become one. The Lord your God is one. We are made in his image. All right, so let's proceed. Okay, I'm going to start the story. It'll be good to start it over this point. Two young adults walked into my office, and I knew the one guy. I knew him from his school days. I knew his mom, and he was a really extroverted guy, full of enthusiasm, a bit of a wild child, really nice guy, studying to be an actor, etc., etc. And he brings us in this girl, and he says to me, "We have a problem here." So I said, "Okay, tell me the story. Unpack it for me." And she said, "Well, I've just had an abortion." And I thought, "Ooh, okay, let's start working with that. Let's just find out what their relationship is, etc., etc." And the truth is, he was 21 and she was 29, going 30. And he didn't want that child, and he was very anxious about proceeding with a child, and he encouraged us to have that abortion, and she said yes, and she fell apart completely afterwards. Absolutely fell apart, and she couldn't stop crying. She was desperate, and I thought something else has gone wrong here. Something it has really hit to the core of this person. What is it about what's actually happening here? And then I'll go to that first slide, and then you actually can just hook this in. Depression and anxiety provokes man's search for meaning. So in order to manage a state of depression, we need to address the questions asked of depression. We need to address it in a rational and reasoned manner. So what I had to do with her is actually take her through a process and actually get her to actually interact with why she was actually feeling that way. She just wanted somebody to take it away. And I think in another world, and yes, we did use medication, but in another world, somebody would have just used medication and would have locked her up in a very much a straitjacket of antidepressants and maybe antipsychotics at that stage. So we need to ask, what is the meaning of this depression? Not why am I depressed, and obviously why she was depressed. So what is the meaning of this depression? Why was she actually manifesting in this way? And why was she not actually getting over it? It was actually at that point probably about 3 months. They were game rangers, and they'd actually come off the game ranging environment, and she had at that point just had these endless crying bouts, and he didn't know how to comfort her. He didn't know what to do for her. Nothing he did actually seemed to help. So we needed to find out what was it about this depression that it was manifesting in this way. So one could actually say that she was in incredible pain, and actually focused the depression she was feeling, the downness, the despair, was centered on this pain. So you kind of like saying at this point in time, it's pretty obvious, she shouldn't have done that. Scratch, scratch, She did. We needed to find out why. So what was this telling us about her life? This emotion that she was experiencing. So when we started to dig, we found out there wasn't a singular reason for what she was experiencing. In effect, this depression is the outcome, or what she was experiencing was the outcome of a number of contributing events that had actually happened in her life. And this was not a stable person. This was not a person that had a wonderful background, grew up great, no problems, okay. Her whole history was fraught. And when you looked at the situation, you realized we have to go to work here, roll up your sleeves, and let's actually start working with what we've got in front of us. So to fix this depression is to look at this flow of events that actually happened in her life. I was a lecturer at Rainbow Bible College for a long time. One of the things that people actually kept throwing at me is, all things are past, all things are made new. It's a scripture. If you don't know it, it's in the Bible. Okay? All right. And a lot of people hung a lot of stuff on that. So in other words, I just need to forget the past. And it was encouraging in some ways, spiritual amnesia, memory amnesia, whatever you want to put it as, that people just wanted to block off. And I had to explain to them when I was actually lecturing to them, listen guys, it's not about forgetting what's happened in your life. God's interested in your whole life. In fact, your life is in your life. Okay? You can't just wipe it out and just put it away. That scripture is about the law. Okay? It's talking to them that sin is forgiven and that you can actually move on from that. And God will and can restore you through the body and through His divine presence. And I've seen that happen 1,000 times and 1,000 times more. Okay, so from his side, if you're actually looking at the question of anxiety, we asked the question, how was he responding to his circumstances? And what was he recognizing and what was he interpreting? So, I kind of got it from the back end. He just thought this was somebody that he got involved with. He didn't know who she was. He thought she was a bit of a fruitcake. And he just wanted out. She was making him exceptionally anxious. He didn't want to continue with the situation. But he saw her locking him into an endless space of drama and a situation that he wouldn't be able to handle. Now we can condemn him, but remember, he's 21, okay? He's not sitting with a huge amount of life experience, and at that point, I think he was pretty selfish. He had his whole mind, his whole future in his own mind, and he didn't want somebody tagging along. She was just a girlfriend, and he didn't have much of a commitment to that process, and then found himself in this situation. So as far as he was concerned, the principle behind anxiety was demonstrated in him, where demand of the situation exceeds his capacity to respond, or so he believed. Okay, and the imbalance between those two is his level of stress. So when you're thinking about your stress, you've got to actually ask yourself, what is the demand of the situation? Okay, 1. 2, what is your perceived capacity? The imbalance is actually stress. A nice gentleman by the name of Albrecht, who wrote a good book called Stress, actually said, well, hang on, wait a minute. What happens if stress equals emotion? No, that's a new thought. The stress you're feeling is actually the emotion you're feeling. And if it's the emotion you're feeling, then you might be feeling overwhelmed, you might be feeling anxious, you might be feeling guilty, you might be feeling shame. These emotions that you are carrying, okay, can be pretty overwhelming because your ability to manage them, the situation exceeds your capacity. And so you're feeling overwhelmed, if I can put it to you that way. And another way of putting it and saying whether somebody's feeling anxious is that they indeed are actually feeling overwhelmed. So when I started to deal with the two of them, I had to actually then start to unpack it. So Plato said, know thyself. And I think it's a pretty good bit of advice, seeing as some of the church fathers actually picked up on that as well. The idea was to undo the knot that she was experiencing. So let's just quote Einstein here. Don't listen to the person who has the answers. Listen to the person who has the questions. Okay. So ask then, to what do I owe this emotion? So as we're going through this, you might be experiencing some depression, and I'm sure from the turnout that actually a lot of you are actually going through some emotion you're experiencing yourself, and you're asking what is happening to me? Often you're asking why, going back to a little bit to the previous thing. She was actually saying, why has this happened to me? So we actually need to get into the what question and not the why question. So what are the contributing events and experiences that this person was experiencing? Okay, to that, I need to ask, I must add the question, how? How is this depression, anxiety built? How is it put together uniquely in me? And then, how am I affected, impacted by life's events so that I now feel depressed or anxious? So in actual fact, we had to say, let's go back in her history. Let's review. Let's actually pick up where she's actually come from. What has happened that she's actually feeling so absolutely overwhelmed in the situation? Let me put it to you this way. In dealing with the primary issue that she was actually experiencing, which is probably what I would call a reactive depression, okay, and the anxiety she was feeling, it was very clear to me when I started to ask the what questions that the foundation in this woman's life was actually very, very flawed, and that we had to actually go in and actually look at that foundation. It's only through those questions that we can actually start to get into that deeper space, okay? And we must understand that it's into that deeper space that we're going. I don't want somebody scratching in my life. You know what? It's your life. It's going to manifest in every single aspect of your daily events. I put it to some of my Bible school students this way. I said, you've got a tree, okay? Cut the tree down. You look at the tree, it's got a whole bunch of concentric circles in that tree. When you look at that tree, you say to yourself, okay, at every single point, every one of those concentric circles is a part of this tree. What are those concentric circles? They are the seasons that tree has lived. So every one of the circles is living in the tree at every one moment. So although that's grown, the layers that have actually been put in are affecting that tree at every single moment. So what happens in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end actually is continuous. We've got to change our model of what actually happens in our life. Postmodernists say, this is important. This moment, no other moment, not the moment in the future, not the moment in the past. It's this moment. I was ripping my daughter off. She says, well, I can find it in Google. And I said, yeah, because Google tell you how to do it. And can you do it? Good question. Okay, you can find the info, but you've got to actually understand how. So how was this thing put together? So how is the depression, anxiety built? How am I impacted by life's events? Starts to make more sense at this point when you see these models. And how did I respond, or am I responding? And how does that reflect on what has happened in the past? And how is that running through into the present at this point in time? So, getting stuck with feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, and resignation are often deeply founded and settled in our being. And then lastly, I must place the depression and anxiety into a time frame, the when. Okay, so it's the what, the how, and the when. When you are actually trying to figure out what's actually happening to you, you need to actually go through all three questions. So what does that actually effectively do for us? It builds what we call a reality cube. Past, where we have a time variable, should I say, okay, on the side running up to the right, from the small rectangle to the big rectangle, and then it says past, present, future, and then on the side it's the how it is built and the what of the contributions. Try and remember that, okay? But it conforms to the biblical principle of sowing, time, reaping. We all know that, okay? Put the seed in the ground, it grows over a period of time, and then you can reap it. The problem is with a thing like depression, it conforms to the same process, okay? Something was laid in your ground, number one. Number two, it grew. And then number three, you reap it as a consequence of not coping, not being able to manage your life. And then you're actually saying, where did this thing come from? Okay, you weren't watching the tree as it actually grew. All right, so let's look at it from a roots and shoots perspective. So I started to look at this girl, and I actually started to ask her, what has actually happened in your life? How did these things happen? And when I started to unpack her world, we actually found that she had quite a broken home, a grandfather who had abused her, who was a primary caretaker, a father who was always AWOL, and a mom who was actually the child, and she was the parent. So she lived in a survival world. And in this situation, she found herself not being able to survive. It overwhelmed her completely. It made her felt like she had betrayed that child. And in her words, and I'm not going to debate the ethics of what I'm actually saying, but she said, I felt I'd murdered that child. And she could not get over that moment. She could not get over that feeling. If we look at the age at which the child was terminated, it was not that long, if I can put it to you candidly. Nevertheless, she actually felt that she'd done something on a much, much deeper level. So we started to build, and we started to go through all the processes in her life, and we started to dig through what had actually happened. And in that process, I got her to actually face up to a lot of the emotions, the unfinished business that she'd never actually looked at. She just drawn a curtain over it. And the depression now became a vehicle and a barometer for us to actually measure whether she was actually progressing or not. It actually became a functional thing rather than a dysfunctional thing. So that when she was depressed and she started getting depression, we actually started to actually realize there's something more there. So the body was starting to give us the feedback that we needed to actually help her sort that situation out. So when considering a time frame, we become aware that the depression can be caught up in earlier events, like I've said. And like the roots of a tree, they're often subterranean and effectively out of sight, like we had with her situation. Subsequently, we need to dig for the origin in the soil in the past, in our memories. Okay, so here's the grand thing. God has given you memories. Okay, every one of those memories actually is coded according to an emotion. Okay, and it's coded according to the experience you have. There's a whole section of the brain called the temporal lobe in which your experiences are logged and they are registered there. Okay, guy by the name of Penfield actually was removing a tumor in a man's brain right in the center in the hypothalamus, right in the center, the mammalian brain and the limbic system. He actually was drilling through, and they took the temporal lobe as the root. Okay, and as they were moving through, the people that they operated on would remember certain experiences in their life. When I was a kid, the taste of ice cream, as an example. Because it was stimulating that area of the brain, and they realized the temporal lobe actually carries all those emotions and it carries all those experiences. Everything you've ever experienced is coded, it's written, it's there. Here's a nice fact for the day. This little thing here does exactly the same. You can never get rid of anything on this thing. What's any private eye? Okay, yeah, so. Just to make you a bit paranoid. So, we need to dig there. Alternatively, the depression can stem from more recent events. So we actually need to focus on the stem as well. And then lastly, our depression could well be orientated to the way we're living in the present. The interesting thing, she had all three areas. She had a real tree of depression. So, shoots, very much to do with what we're involved with on the day-to-day. Roots, what happened in our past. The stem can be more recent events. It could be something like you losing somebody that you love. It could be a grief. It could be a massive change in your life. It could be losing friends. So there are a number of things that could contribute to a depressive situation. So then we need to ask the question, will my garden grow? Okay. I need to just shift from the depression thing just into a little bit of anxiety for a minute, getting anxious. So life's little expectations, as it were. So let's go back to the guy in the story. Okay, so he was getting incredibly anxious and was pushing that this thing is resolved, and eventually actually broke up with the girl. So kind of like left her with her pain, handed it over to me, and it was all now resolved. Okay, so she then actually took it upon herself on this breakup to attempt suicide. Tring, tring, hello, who's it? Okay, can I help? Yeah, if you take those pills, you're going to die. Okay, you've taken the pills? Okay, well, what did you take? You got 20 minutes. What do you want to do? Okay, do you want to live or do you want to die? This is the conversation I had with her. Saturday afternoon. And she said, at that moment, I want to live. I said, okay, you've got to get to this hospital in this time. If you don't, I don't know where you live, you will die. Okay, she got there. She was there before me. Okay, I rushed across, phoned the boyfriend. You have a problem. This is your responsibility. You need to be there. So he arrived. He had enough courage to do that. But he was completely overwhelmed. I could see it. And he was anticipating some huge drama. The problem is this girl didn't have medical aid, or this woman didn't have medical aid. And so what they do at a clinic down the road or wherever, okay, they say to you, we've stabilized, take her off to the general. Does she have transport? Otherwise we have to call an ambulance and we have to wait. And yeah, so we put a bundle in the car, his car, and I followed them and we went off to general. She was admitted. The incident was around about 6, and she was admitted around about 1:30 that morning. Yeah, so that's kind of like the waiting period. And that was with my best attempt to seduce the nurse on duty. Okay. So, what have I learned about the upcoming future situation that is eliciting my anxiety? It's my belief in my ability and the perceived responsiveness of the context situation to my behavior will determine my arousal state. He believed that he could not handle the situation. He sat there for a while and eventually said to me, can I go? I said, you can only go once she's actually in. So I said, you can do it. Okay. He accepted it. And yeah, he stayed there. So I think the same thing with anxiety. we have two things. We have to actually question whether we actually have the skill to actually do something and the belief in that skill. And then secondly, whether the environment around us will actually accept it, okay, and will accept our input into a situation. Now, if I actually believe that I can do public speaking, but I actually feel at any point that you will not be receptive, okay, my anxiety will go up, okay, or I've actually missed my audience somewhere along the line, which I've done in the past, and that's actually quite a lot of fun. Okay, I can't see you, so. All right. Yeah, so that'll make you very anxious, and to make you anxious for the next time around, especially if you're speaking to that same audience. And I think the same thing with any anxiety situation. It's your belief in your skill. 1, 2, can you actually connect with the situation? Can you actually make a difference? So this actually, if you take it into relationships, it takes on a different tone. So I might believe that I can actually interact with a member of the opposite sex, okay? I can talk to them, but in some ways I can't get a connection going, or I can't get a relationship going in some way, and that actually leaves me feeling a little bit anxious about actually engaging and interacting with a member of the opposite sex. So what actually happens in those situations? I feel anxious. So getting into a situation where we feel overwhelmed or anxious because of our belief or the receptiveness. So you could be a very eloquent person, you could be attractive, but the people that you're connecting with just don't actually give a good response, okay? So you could be a reasonably sophisticated person, and you could be hanging around with rugby guys, and for some reason or other they just don't appreciate you, okay, etc., etc. You know, so you're going to be very anxious every time you go into that context, and after a while you'll start believing in your ability to actually do that. This is the roots and basis of anxiety, okay? He was in a situation where he's feeling completely overwhelmed and anxious because he didn't believe anything that he did would actually make any difference. He believed in his ability, and trust me, he had incredible ability as a human being. He still does. He's a very successful lawyer in a faraway country. Okay. So, let's have a look at the roots. Attachment and loneliness. How we connect. Laws of connecting. So the first thing we actually got to realize is in this girl's situation, her attachment to her parents was very, very poor. And that parent-child relationship, the quality of which determines, okay, the child's early adaptation. Her adaptation was very poor. And we need to understand that the intersection between our biological development or process and the bonding process between us and our parents has an incredible effect on how we actually view the world in a later stage. On top of that, I spoke to you, she had a role reversal with her mom, and she became an adult way before she should have. It's a nice quote here. She was an adult before her time, and as an adult, she shared the responsibility of adulthood. Okay, she wanted this guy to look after her. Everything in her wanted him to do that. That's why she did what she did, and she knew she could not look after a child. She had no capacity, and she didn't want to repeat her life on steroids. Okay, so growing up too quickly for survival's sake leaves what we call developmental wounds. There are a lot of people in this world with developmental wounds, okay? The problem is we don't actually want to journey with people into painful spaces, okay? It's uncomfortable. It takes a lot out of us, okay? And the truth is in a community, and this is where I'm going with this lecture tonight, is that we don't want to actually step up into that space. We don't want to hear. And if somebody actually is on auto repeat, you know, we're going to freeze them out at some point or other. Okay. God played a trick on me. Let me tell you the trick. Okay. I lived in Randburg. I had great mates. I was a good school. I had great mates. My parents moved to East London. I went to Wits. None of my friends came with me. I was alone. Okay. I had one friend. He was deaf. He was a dweeb. in every respect of the word. Rob was the most inadequate person on earth. This was my one friend. I was a first-team rugby player, okay, hung around with macho guys. He was below my standard, okay, far below, okay. The interesting thing is Rob was deaf as well, okay, which really was difficult. And I just realized that, okay, if I'm going to get through this thing, I need to be friends with Rob. There's no way out of this box. And as time went by, I learned to really love Rob. Okay, and we connected, and then we parted ways over a period. Today, he's a priest, Anglican priest, of a major church consortium, if I can put it to you that way, in Australia. Okay, he runs a blog continuously. He's got a big parish, highly successful, very confident. Okay, it was a very interesting story for me. I don't think that was on me. Okay, but I think loving somebody and actually spending time with them and getting involved with them, we don't know where that's going to go. Okay. We really, really don't. So back to our story. So the early foundations to depression. The more we learn about infants, the more we know about how critical their earliest experiences are. There are different pathways that can lead to depressive outcomes. Both loving and hateful families can produce depressive dynamics out of an infinitely varied combination of loss and insufficient process of that loss. So if we don't work those things through, us in our being will actually carry it for later. And it manifests as depression in our lives. So, chronic inadequacy and longing. Depressed individuals experience themselves not so much as actively bad, but rather as chronically inadequate and longing. She was an incredibly longing person, with incredible shame and incredible guilt. And the more we actually spend time with that, the longing actually became quite an issue. She longed for Stuart. She could not get over him. She constantly phoned him. She harassed him. She used to harass him at night. She used to send SMSs. They were all abandonment-orientated SMSs. In fact, she used to get herself drunk so she wouldn't remember what SMSs she sent at night. Okay. Then she used to delete the SMSs so that she wouldn't, her sober self wouldn't find the drunk SMSs. She was very clever. Okay. You've got to see humor and pathos. Okay. All right. So depressive people are usually deeply sensitive to abandonment and unhappy being alone. She was very unhappy being alone. So the big thing was to actually keep the therapeutic or the counseling situation constant so that she could actually get through that whole situation and not actually experience abandonment. We started to do some reconciliation with the family, started to work on that, started to reattach her. She ironically reattached to her father. Her mother was not in that space, but her father actually started to do some really good things for her. And he made amends for the kind of irresponsibility of his own life and was very apologetic about what his father had done to her. And it took time to internalize a corrective stance in her where she became more secure and she became more at ease with herself as the more we actually spent time just working through what had actually happened, working through her life, and started bringing up more and more to the current situation. Here's some interesting thoughts. Adverse childhood experiences, trauma in childhood. There was a study done in about 2015, if I'm not mistaken, where they handed out a questionnaire where people were asked about 10 different categories of terrible things that can happen to them when they were a child, from being sexually abused to being emotionally abused to being neglected. It turned out for every category of traumatic experience you went through as a kid, you're radically more likely to become depressed as an adult. If you had 6 categories of trauma in your childhood, you're 5 times more likely to become depressed as an adult. If you had 7 categories of trauma, even as a child, you were 3,100% more likely to commit suicide as an adult. My constant fear was she would commit suicide. Okay. Emotional abuse. Words can hurt me permanently. The greater the trauma, the greater your risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Still going on with the study. The technical term for this is dose-response effect. The more cigarettes you smoke, as an example, the more your risk of lung cancer goes up. That's one reason we know smoking causes cancer, because people who smoke more get cancer more. Okay. In the same way, the more you were traumatized as a child, the more your risk of depression arises. Curiously, emotional abuse, and this has been proven to me over and over and over by people that actually have gone through both situations, is more likely to cause depression than sexual molestation. Okay, how you see yourself, you can get over the event, but you can't get over how somebody actually portrays you, because it's inculcated in you and you start to repeat it yourself. So being treated cruelly by your parents was the biggest driver of depression out of all these categories. So when we look at somebody, you've got to actually look and say, what is actually happening here? So my point is, we need to share our lives. We don't live in a world in which we share our lives anymore. One of the big things about cell phones, okay, is that you WhatsApp, okay, no eye contact, none, okay. You're not in somebody else's presence. You're not making contact. And people think they have relationships. Kids think they have relationships. They play games, okay. They're on the net playing games, talking to somebody through a game, but they're not making contact. They'll say things to people, but they'll never actually speak it out at a later stage. Okay, the next day it's anonymous. It's almost as if it didn't happen. So, two quotes from two prominent psychiatrists, okay. In working with depressive patients, one can practically hear the internalized person speaking. When a client says something like, it must be because I'm selfish, a therapist can say, who's saying that? And here's the interesting thing. We're like a computer program. Your parents have got the compiler. They're writing the code. Okay? If that code goes wrong, they've internalized the voice of that parent. Okay? And they've taken it upon themselves. And part of our growing up is owning our own voice. Test that I used to give my Bible school students, and you actually can try it yourself, is actually to say, okay, say your name out loud to yourself, okay, or whisper it kind of thing. Listen to the tone, okay? Then let that pertinent person in your life say that name, your name, to you. And see which one has more access to your emotions. The person who's spoken, who's got more access to your emotions, they've got more power to influence you. You will look to them for affirmation. You will look to them for your self-esteem. And until you own your own voice, you're going to continue to suffer and struggle, because that person will be playing in the background. And this psychiatrist, Nancy McWilliams, actually said, it feels sometimes like you're talking to a ghost. Okay, somebody else is speaking through that person. So who said that? And you actually realize, the person on reflection will realize, well, it was my mother's voice. That's what I listen to all the time. I was speaking to somebody the other day. She said to me, do you mean I don't have to listen to that voice? She said, that voice is very cruel. I thought it was my own. This girl had the same thing. She was repeating over and over this kind of stuff until she took control of her internal voice. Only then did she start to actually show some redemption, if I can put it to you that way, in terms of this depression. The kind of self-talk that characterizes depressive people is the unconscious internalization of the hateful qualities of an old loved person, the parent, maybe somebody you've actually dated. This person's possession attributes are generally remembered fondly, whereas the negative ones, the attributes, are remembered fondly. But the negative things are actually internalized and they become part of ourselves. Okay, we take them in, we swallow them, the ghost in the machine. So, confession is good for your soul. Talking about it is really good. First time I ever encountered this, I went down to a mission station in Natal. It was called Kwasibantu. Okay, excuse my Zulu. And it was very interesting. They would actually say, they give a salvation message. The person would come up, okay, give their lives to God. Then they go into a little room and they would tell that person their whole life from start to finish. Well, if that took 18 hours, it took 18 hours. Think about this, guys. Church counselors. It seems like it's on steroids. They sat there until they told their whole life. They got it out, the whole lot. I was shocked. These people had a bit of sleep deprivation. Okay. But it was amazing. It was actually amazing to see the transformation in people's lives, and actually just to see how much they had to actually get out, how much pain was there, how much weeping there was there, how much connection there was. Okay. I mean, this place was a revival center of note. It was known throughout the country at that stage. So, the evidence suggests that by reconnecting a person with his childhood trauma and showing him that an outside observer doesn't see it as shameful, you go a significant way towards helping him free from some of its negative effects. Now, is that all we need to do? No, but it's a big step forward. Going beyond the biomedical model, Alan Barber, an internist at Stanford University, said that depression isn't a disease. Depression is a normal response to an abnormal life experience. First time I heard that it was a disease, I had the biggest argument with the psychiatrist I've ever had. I had such a bad argument with him, he didn't speak to me for the rest of my internship. Okay. I phoned him up many years later. There was an oncologist that actually got very depressed, and I thought we should actually have him boarded. I phoned up the actual particular authority, and I spoke to, guess who? It was Mike. Okay. I said, "Hello, Mike." He said, "Hello, Mark." I'm talking 25 years later. Okay. I said, "Is this the Mike?" Mm-mm. He said, "Yep." "Is this the Mark?" Mm-mm. I said, "Yep." He says, "We meet again." He says, "What do you want this time?" Okay, so this idea takes you beyond the comforting, limited idea that the reason I'm depressed is I have a serotonin imbalance or a dopamine imbalance or whatever you have. Okay, it is true that something is happening in your brain when you become depressed, but that is not a causal explanation. This girl was not depressed because of some serotonin mishap. Okay, she had a whole lot going on there. A lot more than that simple answer. So some people don't see want to see this because, at least at first, it's more comforting to think it all happening simply because of the changes in the brain. It's a much simpler process, okay, to actually propose that. It takes away the experiential process and substitutes for a mechanistic one, okay. We lose our humanity in this thing. It turns your pain into a trick of light that can be banished by drugs. And often that is, until the next time. They're the ultimate. Are they the ultimate and end all? No. But they sometimes, do they sometimes shortchange people? Yes, absolutely. So they do, medications do have a role. But, and I'm not denying that because I think the whole world did change when medication came in on this nature. And I know in a mental institution, they used to put people in straitjackets and then they used to medicate them. They used to beat them up and then they used to medicate them. Yeah, and that's the truth. Okay. So there was a massive change there, but doesn't mean to say that we've got to not deal with both sides of the thing. So we need to actually see depression, particularly reactive depression, and definitely the deeper stuff, as a reaction to the way we are living. Okay. And it's an important thing that we actually start to comprehend that it is a reaction to the way we're living, where we are disconnected from each other. If I didn't take the time with that woman, she wouldn't be here today with two beautiful girls, okay, and married, and she's in a job, and she's doing just fine, okay. And she phoned me the day her baby was born. She phoned me the day she was pregnant, the day the baby was born. And she said, "Guess what? I'm going to be a mommy." It was a very beautiful moment. So we were connected in that sense. I'm a professional. She's a client across the sea. Long way away. Okay, but the other day she phoned me and she said, do I take this antidepressant or not? Okay. So I asked her circumstances, check in. Yeah. You know what, at the end of the day, you might be that person actually assisting somebody else. Okay? You might be that person assisting somebody else. You never know who it is that's actually going to be assisting. And if we make ourselves available for that process, I think we change the world around us. If it's an innate biological disease, the most you can hope for from other people is sympathy. Because in a sense, you have a difference, and I must feel kindness towards you. But if I've got empathy, and I know that I can actually experience that as well, then I'll show you empathy. Okay. So you got the disease, it's like AIDS or rheumatic fever or whatever. You've got something, okay, that you need to deal with. We need to medicate it, okay. You need to treat it, okay. Put you over there. I feel sorry that you got that. But if I know that I can experience that, and I can go through this thing, and my life's not hanging all together, then it gives me empathy, okay. Then I can feel with you, okay. And I don't just feel sorry for you, okay. I can actually interact with you. And in my life, at least I can actually share with you, at least. So imagine your marriage broke up, you lost your job, and your mother just had a stroke. It's pretty overwhelming. Because you're feeling intense pain for a long period, your brain will assume that it's in a state in which you're going to have to survive from now on. So it might start to shed the synapses that relate to things that give you joy and pleasure, and in turn might strengthen the synapses, the brain connections, that relate to fear and despair. Maybe that's the reason we do feel depressed. We got to actually ask, was her depression inappropriate? No, it wasn't. It was very appropriate. Okay. So, that one reason that you can often start to feel you have become somehow fixed in a state of depression, that is one reason, or anxiety, even if the original cause of the pain seems to have passed. Having worked through that, the depression was still there. You see, the brain had got fixed, and so we had to actually use some medication to assist her. And she could go off for periods and go on. There was a very deep brokenness and scarring in this woman's life. And I've just touched on the surface of some of the stuff that actually happened to her. Ask not what's inside your head. Ask rather what your head's inside of. It's important to understand where you're going with your mind and what's actually happening to you. So, shoots, reaching out and connecting. Do to others as you would have them do to you. I'll read this to you. I saw the error I had been making. Now, when I feel myself starting to slide down, I don't do something for myself. I try to do something for somebody else. I got to see a friend and try to focus very hard on how they are feeling and make them feel better. I try to do something for my network or my group, or even to try and help strangers who look distressed. I learned something I wouldn't have thought was possible at the start. Even if you are in pain, you can almost always make someone else feel a little better. When I applied this technique, I realized that it is often, though not always, it stops the slide downwards. It worked much better, more effectively, should I say, than trying to build myself up alone. You see, my deaf buddy was my antidepressant. If I didn't happen to have him, I would have slid into a massive depression. I was starting to slide at that stage because I'd lost everything that has supported me in my life. Okay, it was my social circle. Okay, and it was very important to me. I'm only child. It has significance for me that friends actually take on the role of brothers and sisters to me. Okay, so having my own family now, that thing is it's not a ghost that haunts me. But at that point in time, that if I didn't have Rob, I think I would have actually gone in. So who was the dweeb? Okay. Here's an interesting bit of understanding. I read that the truth about depression and anxiety, and this came from the World Health Organization and the United Nations. We need to accept that depression is biological, psychological, and social. The World Health Organization in 2011 said mental health is produced socially. presence or absence of mental health is, as above all, a social indicator and therefore requires social as well as individual solutions. Okay. The United Nations, in its official statement for the World Health Day in 2017, that's just yesterday, explained that the dominant biomedical narrative of depression is based on biased and selective use of research outcomes that cause more harm than good. It undermines the right to health and must be abandoned. We need to figure out what the meaning of the pain is, of depression and anxiety. You need your pain. It's a message that you must listen to. It's something that you must just ignore. All these depressed and anxious people all over the world, they're giving us a message. They are telling us something has gone wrong. 70% more people, young adolescents, are depressed as a result of cell phones. As soon as these smartphones actually came out, 70% more people are got themselves depressed. 70% more. Okay. What is it? They're telling us something that's gone wrong with the way we live. The need to try to muffle or silence or pathologize that pain. Instead, we need to listen to it and honor it. It is only when we listen to our pain that we can follow it back to its source. And only there, when we can see its true causes, can we begin to overcome it. So as a community, somewhere along the line, we need to actually start to actually raise ourselves up so that we can actually change our mindsets and actually start to see people in a different way. This is the biggest division between the old story about depression and anxiety and the new story. The old story says distress is fundamentally irrational, caused by a faulty apparatus in our head. The new story says our distress, however painful, is in fact rational and sane. I'll go to that last quote there. How different would it be when you went to your doctor and she diagnosed that you were disconnected? What would happen then? Would people wouldn't need to be drugged. They would need to be together. So, to finish off with this piece here. If you've got questions, there's the SMS. So what is the antidepressant? What's the anti-anxiety, the anxiolytic? Okay. The first thing is to reconnect. Just like this woman did, and go through that process of actually finding with somebody what is actually happening in your life, to other people. But just the act of connecting in itself will actually lift up your spirits. We need to acknowledge and overcome our childhood trauma and seek integration. We need to be whole. We need to be integrated. We need to connect to meaningful values, hope, trust, love. And the Bible uses the term resilience, but I'll just use it here as, fortitude, I'll use it here as resilience. We need to have empathy and overcome the addiction to self, that we just need to look at us, sort ourselves out, and then everything will be fine, you know? You're poor, and I'm rich. Okay, I don't need to actually reach out and actually meet you. I do know that that person who is poor in spirit, and this is a truth, actually often is Jesus in disguise. He's often Jesus in disguise. This woman, if I didn't reach out and assist her, I knew for a fact that I was in for the high jump. And it would have been easy at any point to actually step out of this game. And one of my colleagues actually said to me, "You're crazy. This thing should have been sent on a different track completely." I said, "Watch. We'll get the healing we need here, and she'll be restored human being." Anxiety, take charge of your thoughts, your expectations, respect your limits. Recognize and interpret your emotions correctly, and actually recognize your limits. Understand what's going on inside you, and recognize your limits. The demand is too much for your capability. Make another plan. Okay, done, dusted.